Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan ending explained in detail. Even though it's over 4 decades old, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan is generally considered one of the best Star Trek films, as well as the one that saved the franchise after the disappointing performance of its predecessor, 1979 Star Trek, the motion picture. It also happens to have one of the saddest goodbyes in movie history. Director Nicholas Meyer saved Wrath of Khan from repeating TMP's mistakes, and in doing so, ensured that the crew of Kirk's Enterprise would continue their adventures on the big screen. The Wrath of Khan is a sequel to Space Seed, one of the most beloved episodes of the original Star Trek series. In Space Seed, Kirk and the Enterprise crew find adrift Khan Noonien Singh, the perpetrator of Star Trek's eugenics wars in Earth's past, and after trying to welcome Khan and his followers into the 23rd century, find that his need for power is too strong. After Khan attempts to take control of the Enterprise and fails, Kirk maroons him and his crew on the uninhabited garden world of Ceti Alpha V and go about their merry way. The Wrath of Khan is a story about vengeance and legacies. Set 15 years after Space Seed, The Wrath of Khan starts as another Federation ship. The Reliant surveys the Ceti Alpha system, looking for a lifeless world to help test the mysterious Genesis device. An errant life sign on the barren 6th planet gets the Reliant's captain, Clark Terrell, and First Officer Pavel Chekhov, formerly of the Enterprise, to investigate, only to find Khan and his compatriots alive. It turns out a massive stellar accident had actually destroyed Ceti Alpha 6 only 6 months after Khan was marooned, and the debris turned the paradisiacal 5th planet into a blasted hellscape. Khan uses Ceti Alpha V's only remaining life, the disgusting Ceti eels, to mentally control Chekhov and Terrell, and then takes over the Reliant, stranding her crew on the planet below. After learning the details of the Genesis device, and how it has the power to completely reshape any planet it's fired at, and that the Starfleet admiral supervising the project is his old nemesis Kirk, Khan sets a course for the Regula 1 space station, home of the Genesis project and its designers, Carol and David Marcus, Kirk's estranged ex-lover and illegitimate son. Khan's manipulations convince Kirk, who is supervising the Enterprise as it serves as a training vessel for a crew of Academy cadets, to head to Regula 1, thinking he needs to help Carol. Upon arriving, the Enterprise is ambushed by Reliant, as Kirk assumed it was still crewed by Starfleet personnel instead of Khan's followers. A quick skirmish leaves both vessels damaged, and Kirk, Dr. McCoy, and Lieutenant Saavik beam down to Regula 1 to investigate. There they find the unconscious Terrell and Chekhov, who explain that Khan murdered the scientists, but that the Marcuses escaped to the nearby planetoid. Kirk and company beam down to the planetoid, and suddenly Khan has the upper hand. Chekhov and Terrell reveal themselves to still be under Khan's control, holding the Admiral and others at phaser point while hailing Khan. Khan orders Terrell to kill Kirk, but Terrell manages to resist, and instead kills himself while Chekhov collapses, his own eel dying. Kirk grabs the active communicator and taunts Khan, to which the Augment leader responds by beaming up the Genesis torpedo and promising to destroy the Enterprise, thereby stranding Kirk on Regula forever. Spock reported that main power would take 2 days to restore, noting cryptically that they would be doing those repairs by the book, and that, by the book, hours would seem like days. Released in 1982, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan remains one of the most beloved and emotionally resonant films in the Star Trek franchise. Directed by Nicholas Meyer, the movie delivers a thrilling space adventure while exploring themes of revenge, mortality, and sacrifice. The ending, in particular, stands as one of the most powerful moments in cinematic history, cementing the film's legacy. Khan's final gambit. The film's climax is set in motion when Admiral James T. Kirk, William Shatner, and the crew of the USS Enterprise engage in a deadly cat-and-mouse game with Khan Noonien Singh, Ricardo Montalban, a genetically engineered superhuman seeking revenge against Kirk. Khan, commanding the hijacked USS Reliant, has been pursuing Kirk throughout the film, blaming him for the suffering he and his people endured on the desolate planet Ceti Alpha V. In their final battle within the Mutara Nebula, the Enterprise is severely damaged, but Kirk outmaneuvers Khan by exploiting his inexperience with 3-dimensional space combat. Khan, mortally wounded and his ship in ruins, refuses to accept defeat. With his dying breath, he activates the Genesis device, a revolutionary terraforming technology that has the power to reorganize matter on a planetary scale. As the countdown to detonation begins, the Enterprise, crippled from battle, is unable to escape in time. Spock's sacrifice. With the ship unable to go to warp due to a damaged warp drive, Mr. Spock, Leonard Nimoy, makes the ultimate sacrifice. Knowing that fixing the warp core is the only way to escape, he enters the radiation-flooded engine room despite Dr. McCoy's, DeForest Kelley, protests. Spock mind melds with McCoy, cryptically saying, "Remember," before knocking him out and proceeding to repair the warp drive. As the Genesis device explodes, Spock succeeds in restoring power, allowing the Enterprise to warp away just in time. The explosion consumes the Reliant and initiates the transformation of the dead planet into a new, life-filled world, Genesis. Spock's death and the emotional impact. One of the most heartbreaking moments in Star Trek history follows as Kirk and the crew realize what Spock has done. Kirk rushes to engineering, only to find Spock standing on the other side of a glass partition, mortally wounded by radiation exposure. In an emotionally devastating exchange, Spock reminds Kirk that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Or the one. Kirk, overwhelmed with grief, can do nothing but watch as Spock, ever the embodiment of logic and selflessness, succumbs to his injuries. Before dying, Spock reassures Kirk, "I have been, and always shall be, your friend." With that, he collapses, and the entire crew is left in stunned silence. The funeral and Kirk's reflection on mortality. The next scene shows Spock's funeral, one of the most moving sequences in the franchise. His body is placed in a photon torpedo casing and launched onto the Genesis planet. As Kirk delivers a eulogy, he struggles to hold back tears, stating, "Of all the souls I have encountered in my travels, his was the most human." This line, spoken by Kirk, who has often been at odds with Spock's logical nature, underscores the profound friendship between them. This moment also marks Kirk's personal reckoning with mortality. Earlier in the film, he struggles with feeling old and useless, especially after being forced into an admiral's desk job. The death of his closest friend forces him to confront the reality of loss, but it also leads to his eventual renewal. Hope in the final moments. Despite the tragedy, the film ends on a note of hope. Kirk, now looking at life with a new perspective, reflects on Spock's sacrifice and the birth of the Genesis planet. As the camera pans over the newly formed world, Leonard Nimoy's voice narrates the classic Star Trek opening monologue, implying that Spock's legacy will endure. The final shot lingers on Spock's torpedo casket resting on Genesis, teasing the possibility of rebirth. This hint, combined with Spock's mind meld with McCoy, subtly sets up Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. The lasting impact of the ending. The ending of The Wrath of Khan is significant not just because of Spock's sacrifice, but because it fully embodies Star Trek's core themes: friendship, sacrifice, and the ongoing cycle of life and death. Spock's death was shocking at the time, as Nimoy had planned for it to be his final performance as the character. However, fan reaction and the success of the film ultimately led to his return in the next installment. Even decades later, the ending remains one of the most iconic moments in science fiction history. It highlights Star Trek's ability to balance high-stakes adventure with deeply emotional storytelling, ensuring its place in cinematic history. Final performance as the character. However, fan reaction and the success of the film ultimately led to his return in the next installment. Even decades later, the ending remains one of the most iconic moments in science